Hello and welcome to my Driver of the Weekend video for the Spanish Grand Prix, the video in which my data algorithm decides the Driver of the Weekend based on the practice results, qualifying and also the race with varying weightings across each of the sessions. It takes 28 main categories, 13 of which look at your own individual performances, and now 15 categories look at teammate performances and how well you did against your teammate. I have added one extra category to this. If you would like an explanation of the previous 27 categories, bar the one that I've just added, I'll pop a little playlist in a card in the corner for you guys to go and look at. That explains and justifies each of the 27 categories chosen, and I will probably update this with a bunch. I have a couple in the pipeline at the halfway point of the season. But not only does this algorithm pop out a Driver of the Weekend score, it also pops out a Driver of Practice, Driver of Qualifying, and a Driver of the Race, each of which we will look at today. We will also be comparing those ranks to my own opinion ranks that I made post-race on Sunday, and then also in that video I let you guys rank each of the drivers in a little poll in a Google Docs document that was in the description of that video. I have since averaged out all of those audience ranks, and we'll be comparing those three sets together, and then seeing who has performed well across the season, adding up the 4 races category scores so far. So with all of that out of the way, let's jump on into the Driver of the Weekend for the Spanish Grand Prix and just take a brief quick look at the practice Driver of the Day. This one isn't too relevant as it only accounts for 2% of the overall Driver of the Weekend score, but it's quite interesting to see that Ricciardo and Perez didn't have particularly good practices, whereas Norris and Verstappen did. And swiftly moving on to the qualifying Driver of the Day. Now I have triple, quadruple, quintuply checked all of the numbers and all of the categories for the qualifying segment of this algorithm, and it is spot on. Bottas was ranked P3, whereas Hamilton was well outside of the top 10. Now this main difference came from Q1, the fact Hamilton was down in P9, and the fact that the gap between Hamilton and Bottas was the largest on the field in the teammate performances. And in such a tightly contested qualifying order, that's all it takes to just slip down that order a little bit. So it does take into account each of the sessions in qualifying as well. I might possibly rearrange the percentage weighting of each session, so Q1, Q2 and Q3 with a progressively more weighting as the sessions go on, but again I'll take a look at that at the end of the session. So by all means disagree with this ranking as much as you like, or even agree with it as much as you like. This is what the numbers have popped out for me. This does not take into account any record breaking, any biases or anything like that, as it just looks at the numbers, at the gaps, at everything else like that. And also average positions as well, as he was P9 in Q1, which is very, very far below. It's about 6 or 7 positions below his average Q1 slot. But swiftly moving on from qualifying Driver of the Day, we take a look at the race Driver of the Day. And once again, Verstappen scores a 16 out of 20 in this order. Hamilton is now P3, just behind Charles Leclerc, who had a mega performance. Daniel Ricciardo is also joint with Hamilton as well. Then there is a small little drop-off down towards Esteban Ocon and Mick Schumacher, who once again finds himself in the top 10. Then Gasly, Russell, Latifi are actually very close together. Raikkonen, Bottas, Stroll, Sainz, Vettel, Nikita Eggbrain, Perez, Tsunoda, Giovinazzi and Alonso and Norris both had shocking races. Now this one I do slightly agree with a little bit more, and this takes into account every single lap of the Grand Prix, the gap to your teammate on every single lap, your position on every single lap, and how that compares to your average position across the whole season. So even when I say there are 28 main categories that go into the overall rankings, there are more like several thousand. I just can't really be bothered to count all of them. I probably will at the end of the season, as there will be some tens of thousands of categories that go into the season Driver of the Day, which will just make for a nice title. But yes, it's 28 main categories, 13 individual performances, and 15 teammate performance categories. And from the race driver of the day, we take a look at the driver of the weekend. Now, I have slightly shifted the weighting. I've now given 2% to the practice scores, 28% to the qualifying scores, and a whopping 70% to the race scores. It hasn't had too much of an impact. I just wanted to reduce the impact of the practice weightings. And this has put Max Verstappen at P1, Charles Leclerc P2, Daniel Ricciardo P3, and Lewis Hamilton very close behind in P4. Once again, Schumacher finds himself in the top 5. Then Esteban Ocon is joint on 12.6. Then we've got Gasly, Russell, Bottas, Stroll, Raikkonen, Latifi, Sainz, Vettel, Mazepin, Perez, Giovinazzi, Norris, Alonso, and Tsunoda near the bottom. Now, feel free to disagree/agree with the algorithm outputs, but bear in mind I will be defending with all of my might my algorithm, as I have literally spent the past 2 or 3 months working on this thing. So I will try and educate you on each of the different categories that are chosen and the justifications for each of these categories. But bear in mind that playlist is in the card in the corner for you to look at. But now to compare the data algorithm outputs to my opinion ranks post-race and also your audience averaged ranks as well. So on screen is the algorithm outputs from largest down to smallest, and then here is my opinions as well that I made in my rankings video. I put Hamilton as P1, Charles Leclerc P2, which actually matched with the data algorithm output, Verstappen as P3, Ricciardo P4, and then Sainz P5. There aren't many matchups at all apart from Leclerc being P2. And then comparing this to what you guys put for the Spanish Grand Prix, you also had the same top 5 as me, with very similar scores actually, once I'd averaged out each of them. And then again, we had very similar endings as well, which vary drastically to what my algorithm has outputted. Not to say that any of these is incorrect/correct, it's just interesting to see my opinions and also the audience ranks as well introduce some sort of bias for your favourite drivers/favourite teams also, and how that exactly plays a role in your decisions about how well a driver did. And also you take into account things like good overtakes, certainly I do as well, and how well of a show they put on and how well they performed overall across the race. Whereas the algorithm doesn't look at anything like overtakes, it doesn't look at anything like good starts, it looks at the raw data behind all of that. It looks at the lap times, it looks at the positions per lap, it looks at your gaps to your teammate, it looks at so many other things, and it isolates anything that can apply any form of bias. And so from here, we will now take a look at the season's ranks so far, and it is for the data-derived ranks, Max Verstappen who is leading the way, with Mick Schumacher actually P2 from Lewis Hamilton and George Russell. That's just showing how much of a good season Schumacher is having if he was not in the Haas. Leclerc is P5, Norris is P6, closely followed by Ocon and Stroll, a small little drop off to Gasly, and then my opinion ranks have put Hamilton P1 from Verstappen, Leclerc, Norris, Ricciardo, Sainz, Gasly, Perez, Ocon and Russell in the top 10, and then the total audience scores has put Hamilton, Verstappen, Leclerc, Sainz above Norris this time, and then Ricciardo P6. So again, very similar rankings between my opinions and the audience ranks, and then very different to what the data algorithm has outputted. And there we go, there is the end of the driver of the weekend video. Like I said, if you agree/disagree, please let me know in the comments below and I'll make sure to reply to as many of the comments as I can. But that's all I've got for you today, guys. I hope you have enjoyed, and I will catch you in the next episode with whatever and whenever I decide to make it. I'll see you guys then.